we have here today. I'll introduce you both to begin, and then you could share your remarks.
Okay, you want us up here?
Yes, if you don't mind, and then you could go back and forth. Board of Public Utilities President Joe Fiordaliso served as Commissioner of the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities since 2005, when he was nominated by Governor Richard Cody and confirmed by the Senate. In 2001 and 2013, President Fiordaliso was renominated by Governor Christie and confirmed by the Senate to continue as Commissioner of the BPU. On January 2018, he was appointed by Governor Murphy to serve as the President of the BPU. President Fiordaliso has been a champion of Governor Murphy's clean energy policies. I'll also introduce you, Commissioner, and then again, you could both share your time. Commissioner LaTourette was appointed by Governor Murphy to become New Jersey's DEP Commissioner on June 14th, 2021. He served as acting commissioner since January 16th, 2021. Commissioner LaTourette first joined DEP as Chief Legal and Regulatory Policy Advisor to then Commissioner Catherine McCabe in 2018. He was elevated to Chief of Staff in 2019 and then Deputy Commissioner in 2020. Since 2019, he has been responsible for running DEP's operations while formulating policy and regulatory reforms to advance Governor Murphy's environmental, climate, and clean energy priorities. Mr. President, the speaker is all yours.
Thank you, Ray. And thank you all for having me here today. I always enjoy coming to BIA events such as this. And I don't know how many times I've been here, but it's always good to come back because I always see people and friends that I haven't seen in a while. So it's great to see all of you here today, and I thank you. You asked a lot of questions, Ray, in your opening statement and so on. And I just want to put one thing out there right from the start. The cost of doing nothing is not an option. None. You mentioned Code Red for Humanity from the United Nations panel. Well, to me, Code Red for Humanity is kind of serious. They're telling us that something, climate change, can be the doom that our Earth faces. Yes, the Industrial Revolution did bring us to a point of prosperity, innovation, a standard of living that too many people in the world don't enjoy like we do. But it also has brought us, to some degree, dangers to our Earth. And as I've said many times before, I don't know of any other piece of real estate we can live on. So we have to look at this seriously, prudently, carefully, as we go down the road. I don't want anyone to leave here today thinking that we just think of things, throw it up against the wall, and say, well, that sticks, so let's do that. That's not what we do. In cooperation with our sister agencies and my colleague, the commissioner from the DEP, being one of those important individuals, we plan. We look at policy, determine the best direction to go. The pandemic has created a unique situation for us, and hopefully we are slowly removing ourselves from this terrible period of time in our history. Also, we talk about the expense of clean energy. And I'm not here to tell you it's not expensive. It is. But what we fail to look at consistently is the economic development and enhancements that are created by clean energy. Clean energy is good business. Let's take offshore wind as an example. One of the cornerstones of Governor Murphy's clean energy policy. New Jersey is geographically so well situated to be the supply chain for the offshore wind industry on the East Coast. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means it brings in manufacturing. Think of places like Paulsboro and Lower Alloways Creek and what we're doing there in cooperation with the DEP, Economic Development Authority, the developers. When was the last time we brought manufacturing back to New Jersey? Well, what does that mean? We're talking over $1 billion of economic enhancement just from the offshore wind industry itself. We're talking potentially hundreds upon hundreds of jobs. We're talking about thousands of jobs in the development of those facilities. So, does clean energy cost money? Yes. Does it also bring money into our economy? Yes. And as we progress, we see that clean energy is a direction that we not only have to go in, but that we have to go in with our full body. It's not just a part-time little thing. Well, if we resolve the problem, we'll be all right. If we don't resolve the problem, no big deal. Code red for humanity. That's you and me. That's future generations. What kind of legacy do we want to leave for future generations who will experience the devastation of climate change? And when that United Nations panel said, code red for humanity, it wasn't talking 100 years from now. It was talking this decade. That's not a lot of time. Offshore wind. Right now, we have over 3,700 megawatts of generation of offshore wind committed. We're exploring various ways and various entry points for the transmission of that. We should see the first turbine in the water by 2025. Our solar industry, one of the highlights of our clean energy initiative, employing almost 7,000 people, over 145,000 solar installations. We have the most solar installations per square mile in any state in the union. That doesn't happen by accident. And I'm not saying we've done this all by ourselves. It's been a public-private partnership because to mitigate the effects of climate change, it's got to be a cooperative effort. We all have to be involved somehow. One of our most aggressive solar initiatives is community solar. To bring solar and clean energy to underserved communities to bring environmental justice to underserved communities so that every New Jerseyan has the opportunity to participate in the mitigation of climate change. Because it's going to take 9.3 million of us to do that. And you say, well, what are other states doing? What are other countries doing? Let's worry about New Jersey first. And the president will be going to a summit in Scotland regarding climate change. We finally have a partner in Washington who talks about climate change. Let's hope it's not too late. And it won't be too late, because Governor Murphy has his foot on the accelerator and is really telling all of us, or maybe I'm telling all of us, to get our booties in gear and do something about it. We have energy efficiency. The cheapest energy is the energy you don't use. Labor intensive helps local communities because that's where they operate. And in cooperation with our utility partners, we're seeing progress being made in the reduction of energy, which means less fossil fuels are being burned. We rejoined RGGI to help decarbonize our region. We're pushing and incentivizing electric vehicles. 46% of the carbon emitted into the air comes from transportation. 46%. And when you drive the Parkway in particular, and you sit there for 15 minutes, just how much carbon is being emitted? A lot. It's an area we have to attack, and we are. So there are so many avenues we have to go down in order to mitigate the effects of climate change. And I submit to you, our Energy Master Plan is a roadmap to get us there. Does it cost a lot of money? Yes. And I'll keep saying that. I'm not going to deny that. We have a study going on right now that will determine the exact amount of money it will cost. And who's going to pay for it? You and me. We're ratepayers. But the one thing the governor has made very clear to us, always keep in mind that whatever initiative we put forth, how is it going to affect the ratepayer? And let me say what I said at the beginning. The option of doing nothing, the cost of doing nothing, isn't an option. We have to spend the money. But what we're seeing too is the cost of clean energy coming down. I know I saw and met some solar folk here who are here today. I've been told, and if I'm wrong, I know you'll correct me, that I can build a solar installation today for half the cost of what it cost in 2007. Why? Because more and more of it's being done. More technology is being advanced. We're learning. So we talk about community solar. We talk about our solar program. We talk about offshore wind. We talk about energy efficiency. We talk about electric vehicles. It makes, and this is something my colleague worries about every day, makes our air better. I was born and raised in the ironbound section of Newark, and I'm at a time, I feel like I'm on a TV show. And we were, there were factories on every block. God only knows what went into my lungs. We don't want that to go into our children's lungs or our grandchildren. So we want to work with you. We're not adversaries. Because you know what? We're all in this together. And I'll leave you with one thing. I believe, and I submit to you, that we have a moral, underlying moral, obligation to mitigate the effects of climate change. Thank you.
All right, well, good morning, everyone. And thank you, President Joe. So I tend to start my conversation about the administration's response to climate change with an overall picture of what in the hell are we doing, right? Because I get asked that a lot, and I'm sure many of you want to know what in the hell we're doing. So our first priority at DEP, we have 5 main priorities that drive us. Our first priority is effectively instituting the climate policy of the state, right? And so what is that policy? If I can put it in a few words, it is to reduce and respond to climate change. That's the policy, broadly stated. So what does that even mean, right? Well, reduce means something, respond means something, right? Reduce means to limit as best we can and as quickly as we can with reliability, with cost, with resiliency in mind. Reduce the emissions of climate pollutants. Respond is how we adapt, how we build resilience to the impacts of climate change that we experience now, and no matter how many electric vehicles we put on the road, no many solar panels we install, or how many wind turbines are twirling in the ocean, and there should be hundreds. No matter all of that, we are in for it. So we have to plan. We have to prepare for the impacts we see today, and that sadly will only worsen. That's the broader framework. So if we've stepped down from there, right, within reducing climate change and responding to climate change, there are 3 main pillars of the state's policy. The first is how we provide thought leadership and direction. So in the reduce space, the directional documents, the thought leadership, like the Energy Master Plan or our Global Warming Response Act 80/50 report that identifies all of the pathways that the legislature could decide to pursue, that different state agencies could decide to pursue. It doesn't establish that policy change. It identifies the mechanisms for making that transition. And only some of those mechanisms are being pursued at this moment. And then there is how we incentivize transition, right? Through programs like incentives for solar, like incentives for wind, like incentives for electric vehicles, charging stations, and the like. But because all the thought leadership in the world, all the directional documents aren't worth the paper they're written on without action, and because the private market in and of itself can't do the thing, we need supportive regulatory reform. in order to help move the thought leadership forward. And that takes time. Nobody is flipping off the switch on natural gas tomorrow. I'm sorry to all my environmentalist friends. That is not a thing, period. Why? For all the reasons Ray talked about and for what Joe hit on. Because we need carbon-based fuels in order to power our economy. That reality exists notwithstanding the urgency of the moment. And I don't deny that it's urgent. By any stretch of the imagination, it is in fact code red for humanity. But I firmly believe that we do not have to punish ourselves and punish our economy on the way to answering that call, because we can unite the forces of economic development and environmental improvement to promote the public good. And I think that's what the administration is actually about. And it's why you don't see the Department of Environmental Protection answering the call for a fossil fuel moratorium, for example, because that would have detrimental effects to everyone. We have to be planful. And so what are we doing at DEP in order to meet that, in order to support the good work that Joe and his team at the BPU are doing in putting forward the thought leadership like the Energy Master Plan and the incentive structures that are put out there? Well, we're partnering it with regulatory reform that is supportive, that will reduce emissions in a word that is pejoratively used against me, but that I don't think is a bad word, in an incremental fashion, because that is what is thoughtful. That is how you make change. You don't enact a regulation that says not another compressor station for a natural gas pipeline ever. Why? Because making that kind of a statement or that kind of a policy choice or implementing that kind of a regulation is blind to reality. I don't believe our governor is blind, and nor is the DEP, nor is the BPU. So what we are doing in order to support the work and the implementation of the Energy Master Plan in this moment, and it's a multi-phase, multi-year, decades-long endeavor, but you got to start somewhere. So where are we starting? We're starting with the first phase of a regulatory reform initiative within a broader directive from the governor. There is an initiative that he directed that we pursue called New Jersey PAC, New Jersey Protecting Against Climate Threats. And broad instruction to DEP was integrate climate change considerations into all your regulatory strictures. Whew, that's a big deal. That's a lot, right? Because we got a lot of regulations, and how you implement climate change, it don't work like that. So we are pursuing the first phase on the reduction side, on how we reduce emissions of what we call climate pollutant reduction, or CPR. And there are a couple of different regulations that we're looking at in that respect. Regulations that will limit emissions of carbon from the dirtiest power plants in a phased manner over the course of a decade, consistent with the trend line of the IEP, the modeling within the Energy Master Plan. And it will occur in a phased fashion. But here's the thing. New Jersey's power generating sector is pretty darn clean. It is pretty darn clean. And you know what else? There have been long-term investments, long-term agreements connected to those facilities. So you don't just turn it off. That's not possible, right? So important in any regulatory scheme, to my mind, is necessary flexibility measures, because we could have the best and brightest ideas, or think we do, sitting in Trenton, but there is a reality on the ground, there is a reality in the marketplace to which we must respond. And so while we may believe that the Energy Master Plan sets a good model and a good path, how we apply reductions from a regulatory perspective must be tied to the same thing that the Energy Master Plan is, the advancement of renewables, such that if renewables don't come online when we expect them to, when we model them for, how we project, that we have to have a responsive off-ramp from a regulatory perspective, because it's sensible. Beyond looking at reductions in carbon from electric generating units, where the proposition is only that we should use the most advanced technology, which the majority of plants in this state do, right? We have to look at the idea of leakage, because we don't want, in the pursuit, because we are connected to everyone else, in the pursuit of reducing emissions in New Jersey, because they know no boundaries. We can't cause leakage elsewhere within PJM, for example, because we have to be mindful of that, right? And so we have to build a more responsive regulatory scheme. And my belief is that the environmental regulatory scheme that exists, it was born 50 years ago in the birth of the modern environmental movement, is inherently backward-looking in lots of ways, always focused on solving the legacy problem, doesn't look forward into the future, isn't adaptive, and we have to make it so. And that is the intent that we bring into this reform. To be careful, to be thoughtful, right? Not to put the hammer down because it is consistent with some pieces of public opinion, because that's not what we're responsive to. We're responsive to the need of our environment, the need of our economy, the need of our people, and how we can confront in order to respond to this critical moment, right? But that other side of the policy stream that I mentioned, respond to respond to climate change, to build resiliency, that is very much present in the energy sector. And we have to think about that too, right? This notion of never another piece of pipeline, never another compressor station, never another natural gas-fired power plant. Don't we want to keep the lights on in the midst of this transition? Don't we want to make sure that that we're not harming our economy in the process? So we have to be attendant to that too, attendant to leakage, attendant to resiliency, attentive to resiliency, to leakage, to affordability, to all those things. We got to bake that in to the regulatory structure. That's what I believe that we're doing. And as Joe mentioned, we have to be really, really thoughtful about the largest source of emissions in our state and in the country, which is our mobile sources of emissions, right? Our mobile sources of emissions not only are our largest greenhouse gas generating sector, but those mobile emissions, as compared to our stationary source emissions, are the bigger culprit of the adverse impacts to health. They're the bigger culprit to the adverse impacts that fall upon disproportionately underserved communities. And we should be honest about that. And we shouldn't just pick a villain because it's easy, right? Because I firmly believe that the future of our environmental regulatory and policy scheme, it's a future of partnership, right? There's no one villain who seeks to pollute and plunder, and there ain't no one conservationist with a monopoly on virtue, right? Because, like Joe said, we only do this together. So, thank you.
We have time for a few questions. We're going to, if you raise your hand, we'll send someone over with a microphone. For COVID reasons, we will be holding the microphone for you, so please don't grab it. Also, if you're here virtually, you could put questions in the chat and we'll try to get to that. Before I turn it over to the audience, I'm take my own liberty of asking both the president and the commissioner just to follow up on some timing of a couple of things. Mr. President, I appreciate that you mentioned the ratepayer impact study. Do you know when we can expect it to be done?
Hopefully by spring of '22.
Thank you. And Commissioner, the PAC regulations, when can we expect the first ones to be coming out? And, can you tell us which ones will be first?
So you've seen the first ones already, right? So the first that we put out, the first that we proposed was an enhanced monitoring and reporting rule for greenhouse gas emissions, right? Because if we want to know what to reduce, when to reduce it, how to reduce it, we need to accurately count what is there, right? This is one of the things that gets decried as an incrementalist measure, but we have to fully appraise the problem to solve the problem. And so that rule has been proposed. We also proposed the advanced clean trucks rule that the public comment has closed on that. We're in the process of evaluating that public comment. And there are 4 others in the pipeline. We have a rule on stationary sources. We have a rule on the NOx omnibus rule. And we have a cargo handling rule, which, by the way, is not an electrification rule. It's a cleaner diesel rule. And we also have in the pipeline our real rule, resilient environments and landscapes, which is our resilience rule. I would expect them all in early '22.
Thank you. I saw a question in the back. Eric?
Good morning, gentlemen. A question for each of you. For President Fiordaliso, first of all, my name is Eric DeJezero. We have the Fuel Merchants Association of New Jersey. Mr. President, in the draft energy master plan, BPU did indeed put out a cost estimate for the retrofit to electrify homes that it was wrong. And the interesting thing is the adopted EMP actually conceded some of the things that went into BPU estimated at $47,000 as a qualifying factor of 4 to 5. Yet in the final EMP conceded the limitations, yet doubled down on the wrong cost estimate. So why would the EMP concede the limitations, yet say it would only cost $4,000 to $7,000? Commissioner LaTourette, you mentioned a couple of times in your talk about not stopping the natural gas and fossil fuel projects immediately. And I would assume that that is something that the NJBIA regulations will be part of that process. Yet on Monday of this week, in response to a petition from 58 environmental organizations, the New Jersey Register published that the department is actually going to be considering their petition for rulemaking that's looking to sort of advance timelines on it. So how do you help me please reconcile your comments here this morning with the department's stated action of looking to maybe speed up deadlines, at least in response to the petition? Thank you both, gentlemen.
Thank you for the question, Eric. And as I mentioned in my remarks, the Energy Master Plan is a roadmap. And it's a living document, meaning that it's just not a document that's going to go on a bookshelf somewhere, and 5 years from now, we're going to dust it off and see where we are. It's a constant review, and where changes have to be made, changes will be made. As you well know, and as every business person in here well knows, that projections many times are not totally accurate. And you have to go back and say, well, okay, where do we have to make an adjustment here? What direction do we have to go to make it more accurate? And I think we all have to also, Eric and everyone else, keep in mind that none of us in this room has done this before. That's why we need your help. That's why the Board of Public Utilities, and I know that DEP, and I'm not talking for my colleague, but has had more stakeholder meetings, and those of you who are old enough to remember this, than Carter has pills. We have had more stakeholder meetings to get the input of the people on the ground the people who know from a day-to-day operation much more in many cases than we do. We learn from you. And hopefully you learn from us. So all I ask is that none of us look at this as adversarial in any way. It's a combined effort. And that's why I enjoy going out and speaking to any group who's willing to hear me speak. I almost feel like I'm going out and preaching a religious sermon of sorts sometimes, because it's that important. So please, when you look at the Energy Master Plan, look at it as a roadmap. And sometimes we have to divert from that road because we learned something new. And many times we learned something new from folks like you, and I appreciate that. Thank you. And I just want to mention one thing before I pass it over to you. In New Jersey, we're a state of 9.3 million people. But as I look around this room, it only reminds me that New Jersey is a small state. As I look around this room, I see a former DEP commissioner in Bob Martin. I see former BPU employees who stay in touch, who are working in the private sector now, willing to help, willing to contribute their knowledge and their information to us. So we're a state of 9.3 million people, but we're a small state. We continue to recycle people. So thank you.
I'd like us to recycle more plastic. So, Eric, to answer your question very directly, what you saw in the register was my intent to respond to the petition. It doesn't mean I agree with it. So we will respond to it. And with respect to pipeline projects, I think there is a very common misunderstanding. The Department of what's been called Extraneous Pipelines, the DEP, does not regulate pipelines. What we regulate are impacts to environmental resources, right? And so if a pipeline is proposed to disrupt an environmental resource, we may have to take a stand. But we do not regulate pipelines from a carbon perspective. We actually have no authority to do that. And so that's a legislative question. It's not a DEP question. And I think the mistake that can often be made is lumping all fossil fuel infrastructure together as though it is some single thing. It is a network of things, pieces of which have different value and different purposes, and may carry an environmental externality that needs to be accounted for and perhaps adjusted. And it's our job, from the perspective of the development of any infrastructure, any use of land that has an environmentally sensitive feature, to reduce the impacts to those environmental features. So I think our authority is so often misunderstood. And what you'll see is a response to that petition. All the register put forward was that we would in fact respond that it was complete.
Thank you. We have time for one more quick question. So Sal, you get one question.
I could be incorrect, but I get the feeling that there is little discussion about hydrogen fuel cells as an alternate to consider. And coming from the mobile sector that you identify so clearly, the application of hydrogen fuels in the mobile sector could be a huge response to the problems that we're trying to solve. And I get the feeling, correct me if I am wrong, that there is not enough money paid to hydrogen fuel. We direct everything towards battery electric, and we are bypassing the moving forward of what should be, and I predict will permanently be, the solution to our mobile energy problems in the future, and that is hydrogen. So I would love to hear both of your responses to my accusation that it is being treated as a stepchild and inappropriately so.
Well, thank you for that. And that's the nicest accusation I've received in many years. So I appreciate that. We actually have a committee within the BPU studying hydrogen fuel cells, because we too see the possibility of this being one of the major areas to help mitigate climate change. So I just like to make the point, and Ray's going to take the mic away from me because I talk too much, but it is important also to understand that I think that we're going down many different roads here, many different directions. So I don't think hydrogen fuel cells are a stepchild. I don't think they're the Cinderella of renewable energy, where they have to mop the floors and all that kind of stuff. So it's not something we forgot about. Let's say that, okay? And I also just like to say one more thing, if I may. It is important to understand, and I think maybe there is a misunderstanding among some people, that suddenly we're going to throw a switch and there's not going to be any fossil fuels anymore. That nukes are going to go somewhere. Natural gas is going to go somewhere. We can only throw that switch when we have enough renewable energy, including hydrogen and fuel cells and so on, to power our needs. So this is not something, and I think Shawn said it eloquently. It's not something that's going to happen today. It is something that slowly but surely we will get there. And people do get nervous when they hear pipelines, but we still have to serve the needs of the 9.3 million people who live in this state, to have that reliability available. We're entering into a season where it gets cold. None of us want people to turn on the heat and there's no heat. So step by step, and I ask that you be patient with us as we go down these many, many roads. There's a lot on the plate. I'm not looking for sympathy, but just a reality. And hydrogen fuel cells is on that plate.
So I think about this a lot, actually, because I'm an all options on the table sort of guy. And I have some friends at the Atlantic Council that I've been talking to about hydrogen in particular, and we recently briefed it at DEP, my team, on the report that's been developed by those folks there. And I think that we do have to make sure that that's a part of the plan. I think what you're seeing isn't a neglect for it, but rather there is such within the market itself, right? There's such a push on the EV side, and we are in a way reacting to that. It's not as though we're not attentive to hydrogen, or we wouldn't want to see that as part of the portfolio. That is not the thing. We're looking at it from the perspective of what's coming to scale, and where the market is going. As the market grows around hydrogen, there are opportunities here in New Jersey. We should seize them. We should do the same thing we're doing with respect to EVs with respect to electrification and provide the regulatory support and the incentive structure support around it if it is in fact renewable, if it is in fact meeting the rubric of what is renewable, right? So I don't think it's a stepchild. I think of it more as lesser developed in a way.
Thank you both, and I want to thank both the BPU President and Commissioner for being here today. Thank you very much.